So I feel like a lot of people are confused on like why are so many Americans brainwashed by the American government, especially people in other countries. But when we talk about propaganda in American politics, I think it's so important that we talk about language because the way things are worded is so intentional. The way they explain things, the way they label things, it's all to create a specific perception. No matter if you're Republican or Democrat, we're all brainwashed. Like if I say doggy instead of canine, you're picturing two completely different things, even though it is the same thing. Now, applying that to politics, right? Right now, everything going on with Iran, notice how the news is never saying the United States just bombed Iran. It's always the United States has carried out military strikes or precision strikes. But in reality, we're talking about a large scale military attack. Bombs are being dropped, infrastructure is being destroyed, people are being killed. Calling it a strike sounds controlled, strategic, almost clean. But a bombing is exactly what it is. And once you start noticing it, you don't unsee it. So, like, another example is when we talk about immigration, you'll hear things on the news like, oh, there are human rights concerns in these migrant detention centers. But what does that actually mean? Are people being mistreated? Are people dying in custody? Are families being separated? They keep it vague on purpose so that you don't feel the full weight of what is happening. Even something like the defense budget instead of military spending. Ask yourself, what are we defending? Are they attacking Americans? Because calling it defense makes it sound necessary, like we're protecting ourselves instead of projecting our military power. And this isn't random, like I said, it's intentional. So there's a concept called plausible deniability, right? Where we use language that clearly will suggest something, but if you get called out for suggesting it, they're giving you enough wiggle room to be able to deny it, right? So for example, when people say things about inner cities, they don't outright say anything racist, right? But when we talk about inner cities with a negative connotation, everybody knows they're referring to black neighborhoods and communities.
Now, this is the thing which is, as we say, techie about what she's saying, right? You can be saying things which are correct, but that doesn't necessarily follow to the conclusion that you want us to take or go to. So what do I mean, right? So words are very powerful. Words have meaning. Yes, I agree with what she's saying 100% in that regard, right? And she's giving you different examples. For example, she talked about the defense budget or military budget. Like, both of those two things can be true. So why should we say one thing over the other? What determines that? Your perspective on the scenario. So if you are a nation, right, like America, and you've got an army, and you have a defense budget. This is the money that you spend in order to defend your country. There's no problem with it being called a defense budget unless you have a problem with what they're defending you from. And the reason I'm saying that is because, yes, like, you could call it a military budget, you could call it many different things, but why should we call it a military budget or money for arms or an arms budget or a war budget? Yes, a doggy, a canine, yes, you can classify them as the same thing. So why should we call it a canine over a doggy? One thing that I'm always going to say, and you should know, is everybody has an agenda. Everybody wants you to think or believe certain thing, which isn't a problem. The problem is when the agenda that people have is negative. And what I mean by that is the agenda is wrong. If you are doing something, let's say, for example, right, I, as a Christian, value life. So the things I'm always going to tell you to do are things which are about helping you get the best out of your life, do the right things. I talk a lot about wisdom, making the right decisions, being disciplined, being wise, etc. This is my agenda. This is part of my agenda, right? So the things I'm going to say are going to fall back into that particular scenario. And I'm unapologetic about that. Why? Because I believe what I'm telling you and showing you is the right thing to do. Imagine someone else is going to turn around though. Like, let's say, for example, like an atheist. In other stuff that I do online, there's atheists that come along the line sometimes and they're like, well, you believe in this imaginary God. Like, why do you believe in this? You're brainwashed. You're telling people the wrong thing to do. They are looking at exactly what I'm doing, and they don't look at it the same way I'm looking at it. They have their own opinion. They have their own beliefs. I've got my own opinions. I've got my own beliefs. But you know what we do? We're able to have conversations. We're able to reason together and come to a point where it's like, okay, cool. What is the truth? What is reasonable? This is why I can listen to what she's saying. And I can say, yes, words do matter. The way you present things do matter. I can say things in various different ways. I can use specific words, which, yes, actually said, can leave it vague and ambiguous and allow you to make the interpretation. But the fact of the matter is, it works both ways. So if America, for example, said, they didn't call it a defense budget, they called it a war budget or something along those lines, right? Something which sounds more offensive, right? People would, as she's saying, start thinking certain things. But what if they are actually defending the nation against foreign threats and even threats on their own soil? That's the point. So it's not like you can always look for negative intentions, and I'm not like defending America, I'm more so just defending reason, right? You can look for negative intentions in anyone, but that doesn't necessarily make it true just because the shoe may fit in some way, shape, or form. So they are taking part in military strikes, right? And she's like, no, just call it bombing. Because one sounds clean and professional and one sounds like more gruesome and more closer to the truth. Well, they are taking part in military strikes. People who understand what military strikes are will understand what's actually going on. Because they don't always necessarily spell all these things out, doesn't necessarily mean they're being disingenuous. That doesn't always follow. That's the only point I'm trying to make in this video. Not because I care about America more than any other country or anything along those lines. I'm always going to look at things from a biblical perspective, because I believe clearly the biblical perspective is the right way to go in everything that we do in life. And this is why I always say, I promise you, the things that you're struggling with in life, add the word of God to it and watch how those things will improve. Why? Not because I'm anything special, but because I'm giving you advice from a special book, which comes from a special person. The more that you do that, the more you realize it for yourself. This is why I always say you have to react righteously. Because there's so many things out there in life which are encouraging us, enticing us to react in a way which isn't godly. And we're the ones that are going to suffer for it. I do videos like this all the time, and we see these situations of people, you know what, I should have done this back in the day, but you know what, I made the mistake, now I regret it. This is what God's wisdom is supposed to help us avoid today. We don't need to get to later on, if we make it that far by the grace of God, to turn around and be like, you know what, I wish I'd done this previously. And we've all been in those situations in life. We've done the wrong thing. We've made mistakes. And the grace of God is so powerful that it helps us today say, you know what? I've gone the wrong way all these different previous steps. But you know what? Now I'm going to go in a different direction. And God's word is so powerful. It can help us make those changes and obviously start to reap some better results. Let's continue to hear what she has to say, right?
Without saying black communities. And then when they're called out for being racist, it's like, no, I didn't say that. You said that.
Oh, yes. And yes, that's how she ended, right? I'll just touch on this briefly as well. So you talk about particular neighborhoods which have certain people in it, or majority of people, and they speak about, let's say, for example, like the crime rate, or they speak about these sorts of things. If those things are true, it doesn't necessarily follow that it is a racist comment, right? Because correlation, things linking or seeming similar or seeming to match, don't always mean it's causation. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because they are saying that these nations, or sorry, these particular places have loads of crime or have loads of XYZ, that this is someone being racist. No, it can simply be someone just talking about the facts that are happening in that particular situation, irrespective of who the predominant people are in that particular location. It doesn't have to mean anything more than that. If someone is going to be racist, there's many different ways to be racist. And again, there are people who are racist who are making those sorts of statements. But just by simply saying that this crime is happening in this location doesn't always necessarily follow that they are being racist. This is very simple. Let's keep going.
And that's a dog whistle. So that's how and you can see how powerful language is even in modern politics. The slogans like "Make America Great Again," it sounds positive, but it's vague on purpose because it makes people fill in their own idea of when America was great, right? Or when Trump says Sleepy Joe instead of Joe Biden, or Crooked Hillary instead of Hillary Clinton. Those aren't policies, they're branding tactics. But
they are branding tactics, and this gets into marketing, which is something I'm very familiar with and love to talk about all the time. Words matter. The way you frame words, the way you present words, they matter. They are going to give you a particular feeling, a particular thought process. What she's saying is true, but again, just because these things are true in step 1 doesn't necessarily follow into step 2 to mean this, right? They call him Sleepy Joe. Why? Because is there any evidence of warranting a title like that? Yes. They call her Crooked Hillary. Is there anything which would suggest that she's done crooked stuff in the past? The point is, calling someone a name only has a certain amount of power. Or let me just put it like this. Calling someone a name can be exasperated and can blow up, right? When there's validity to the claims that are being made. Yes, you know, you can have loads of people saying something and that can be used as propaganda. But the propaganda is even more effective and more powerful when the thing which is being said is actually true. That's the difference.
Once you hear them enough, even if you don't know why Hillary's Crooked Hillary, that shapes how you view that individual without needing any deeper explanation. So like when we call immigrants undocumented, it makes you think of paperwork. But when you call them illegal aliens, it makes you feel like they're not human. They're criminals, they're outsiders, threats. It's the same person, but it's a different reaction. And when you have phrases like the war on terror, who's going to oppose that? Because nobody wants to be on the side of terrorism. But that wording made it really easy to get Americans on board with war after 9/11 because so many people were scared. Post 9/11 propaganda had Americans associating Muslims with terrorism. And that fear made everything that we did to the Middle East feel justified. And here's the part they don't get into. They won't teach you in school about the letter to America by Osama bin Laden because it would contradict everything you've been taught about 9/11. And I'm not saying you have to agree with it, but if you actually read it, you'll understand that from Osama's perspective, the United States and Israel were the ones being labeled as terrorists. So now think about that. If Americans were taught that side growing up, do you think that when we did our war on terror in the Middle East, we would have had the same level of support? Probably not.
And this is where, again, we're seeing the same theme over and over again, right? Everything comes down to perspective. Everybody has a perspective. They always say there's 3 sides to a story, right? His side, her side, and the truth. Or their side, your side, and the truth. This is what I'm going to continue to pull us back to, the truth, right? Is it a surprise that Osama bin Laden was turning around saying that the Americans and Israel are the ones that are doing acts of war, of terror? No. If he is going to fight against America, if that's what you believe, obviously he's going to fight against people he thinks are the enemy. The same way the Americans or the Europeans or the Australians, whoever it is going into a battle thinking that the opposition are the enemy. This is basic. This is simple. But again, the one thing I agree with is, as I'm going to continue to agree with, words matter. So when you're going to do real history, you don't just look at American history and what America's saying. You look at as much data as you can. So you'd listen to both sides, and then you'd come out on the side which makes the most sense, which is most reasonable. That's the point. Because as much as she's saying the Americans say this particular stuff, what do you think their opponents are saying? They're saying the same stuff typically, but from their perspective. So this makes a lot of sense. Most people are going to say things from their perspective. The Americans are going to say what they want to say. The terrorists or whoever it is are going to say what they're going to say. You look at what both people are saying and you come to a viable conclusion. And this is one thing, when she was talking about 9/11 and terrorism and all this kind of stuff. Just because of 9/11 shouldn't be the reason why people were afraid of Islam or Muslims, right? All you have to do is read the Quran. All you have to do is read the Hadith, which are additional informations. I talk and debate with Muslims every single week. Most of them don't even know what's in their literature. But the fact of the matter is, there is very questionable stuff in the literature, which if more people knew, I'm telling you, more people would have a different view of Islam. Not the Muslims, right? Most Muslims are nice people, just like anybody else. But the people that actually know the religion, that's a whole different kettle of fish, because they really understand the mandate in Islam, and most people don't. So guys, I'm going to leave it there, right? Because I could keep going. But all I'm going to say is, don't forget to like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, don't forget to react righteously. God bless.